We got one more guest here for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the #1 on Twitter, regular contributor to VSIN and the Point Spread Weekly newsletter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Adam. Good to be with you.
Good to have you once again here, buddy. And, once again, a reminder to our listeners that we are recording this on Tuesday afternoon. So some of these odds are very likely to have moved. Some of these golf prices may have moved as well that Wes and I are going to talk about. But because I got something going on here on Wednesday morning, had to record a day in advance just to make sure I could get the show out for everybody. But, Wes, let's go ahead and start, I guess, with the college football market since we finished up on the NFL with Brian. And, you and I were kind of having an interesting talk off the air. And, I'm in some respects, I'm glad people aren't privy to the conversations we have just because of some of the colorful language and whatnot. But it was an interesting discussion, and I do want to carry it over a little bit here to the show in the sense that a lot of people talk about getting the best of the number. A lot of people talk about being ready to get those opening numbers. And as we've been looking at the marketplace here and as I've been studying it throughout the season, I kind of have some doubts as to whether or not that first line move is a true sharp move.
Yeah, and I do too as well. And I mean, I think that, and it's been going on for years a little bit, but now I think with the trick was always, hey, you want to beat the opener. You want to get down on these openers when they come out on Sunday or late Sunday night, Monday morning in the NFL case. You want to get down on these. But now these are coming out earlier and earlier because they want to generate handle. And, look, they're taking lower limits early in the week on Sunday and Monday. So you're going to be able to get more down on whether it's college football sides or totals, NFL sides or totals, as you get later in the week. Like you'll get more down on a Friday night or a Saturday morning than you can get down on a Sunday afternoon with these openers. So sometimes, I mean, because the limits are low and guys can move enough money to move a line, you'll see them move it to maybe where they want. And it's the side I like this week, and it's one I'll use an example on the college side. Michigan State, Circus Sports has been the first to come out with these college football lines. Michigan State opens at like 8.5 or so. It immediately gets bet down to about 6.5 because obviously Michigan State with that putrid offensive performance, even though they did gain about 400 yards, only generated 7 points and lose outright at home to Arizona State as a 2-touchdown favorite. But we know that Northwestern is that old, if you know it, they know it. Everybody knows that Northwestern over the years under Pat Fitzgerald is really good as an underdog. I think it's like, I may be off by a game or two on this record. I think it's like 59, 38, and 2 against the spread historically for Fitzgerald since he's been in Evanston. So, yeah, that looks like a big number with an offense that can't score. So, of course, the money is going to come on Northwestern. It gets moved down to 6.5. And I figured there was maybe a small setup here, but I figured maybe that line was going to dance around 7 or 7.5 throughout the week. If you could get the hook, you were going to take the Wildcats. If you can lay 7 or less, then you're going to lay Michigan State. And all of a sudden, that gets hit yesterday, and you're seeing 9.5 pretty much painted in the market, and even a couple rogue 10s out there. So it's like, I mean, the first move I definitely don't think is always the right move. You were getting a lot of setups with these low limits.
Yeah, it sure seems that way, and it seems that way across multiple sports markets as well. And, another one I can touch on here, a couple of them actually from this week, UCF and Pitt. UCF goes from, 9.5, 10, all the way up to 14 before coming back down. And Utah State, a similar one, up from 3, 3.5 to 5.5 and maybe a rogue 6. Then that one comes back down to 4. So I think what we're kind of seeing here is that some of these teams with these elite profiles, like a Utah State, like a UCF here so far early on in the season, the modeling crowd instantly loves them because, models are going to, very much respect elite level efficiency. And teams like Utah State and UCF have that. Then you get the handicapping side that comes in and says, well, wait a minute. UCF, big Power 5 win. They go on the road. Pitt outgained Penn State last week. That line's just too high. I'm going to take Pitt. Then you see, San Diego State, Rocky Long, similar thing to what you mentioned with Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern. Rocky Long is historically a very good underdog coach. So that line comes
Right.
back down. So the push and pull in the market here is really interesting, especially early in the week, Monday, Tuesday, where you've got a limit increase, overnight from Monday to Tuesday, to where you start getting some bigger bets down the middle of the week. Maybe those are the positions you really want to focus on out there.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And then you look at some games on the board, like on the college slate this week, that are probably going to get two-way action, where you're not going to have necessarily a sharp and a square side. You're going to have sharps really on both sides of the game. Like Michigan, Wisconsin, I think, is a perfect example. You're going to have sharp guys laying Wisconsin with the field goal here, maybe taking a small money line. And then you're going to have sharp guys taking Michigan at the 3.5, and that line is kind of danced around the number, and I think it probably will all week, where you saw it get as high as 4, you saw it get as low as 2.5, but it's pretty much going to dance around that number. Auburn, Texas A&M, another one. Texas A&M -4. I think it opened maybe some 2.5s, 3 out there, but you'll have guys that are smart guys that are on both sides of that game. So there's no true, like we kind of see when we talk about some of the NFL on Sunday, where you have that quote unquote pros versus Joes type of thing. So I mean, I think that term may be becoming passé, because I mean, different people are going to have different numbers on these games. So it's like, okay, that was the right number to take this side, but the other side, this is the right number. So I think that's really what you're seeing so far.
I want to go a little bit more in depth on that Michigan-Wisconsin game. We did do that on Tuesday with Ralph Michaels, but good to crowdsource opinions, especially on these marquee types of games. I mean, look, Michigan was a 5-point favorite in the Gold Nugget Games of the Year lines. And I fully understand that Michigan has not looked good against Middle Tennessee State. Probably should have lost to Army. You could certainly make a case that they should have gone down to the Black Knights there, even though they did only give up, 3.5, 3.8 yards per carry, something like that. But what has happened with Wisconsin in 2 games against absolute dregs in South Florida and Central Michigan to necessitate a move of 8.5 points from where these two teams were over the summer? I mean, that's extremely big adjustment, I think, to 2 data points where Michigan's played the tougher schedule.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I am going to be on Michigan at 3.5, and I think, like I said, that's going to dance around, I think, the key number. And Wisconsin was who I picked on that side of the ledger in the Big Ten West, and I do think that they're still the team to beat over on that side. But you look at Michigan. I mean, this team going into the season, when we were doing a lot of our radio shows kind of previewing whether it was win totals or whether it was conference futures or college football playoff futures, Michigan and Ohio State were basically like co-favorites in the Big Ten. I mean, maybe like 3-2, I think plus 150. Now Ohio State has moved to the odds-on favorite at minus 110. Michigan has moved already to 4-1 to win the Big Ten, and off 2 sluggish performances in terms of the fact that they were big favorites, they didn't cover at home. So, I mean, I think that's what people will bet, and that will adjust within the numbers, because it's like, well, Michigan's running this new up-tempo offense. They were life and death to beat Army, even though they outstatted Army in the game. The situation called because Army was able to slow the tempo and keep possession of the football, which they're one of the best in the country at doing. So all of a sudden, you're like, oh, you were life and death to beat Army, so, maybe this team isn't good. And we know how Michigan also ended the season last year, getting blown out, giving up 62 in Columbus to Ohio State. And then a lot of these, few of their draftable guys elected to sit out the bowl game, and then Florida whacked them 41-15 in the Peach Bowl. So, the perception on Michigan is so low right now. And then Wisconsin, even though they beat 2 dregs, did win by a combined score of 110-0. So that's going to be impressive. And you look at all the defensive rankings, you got to take into account the competition, though. But they're like number 1 in total defense. They're right up there in rushing defense in terms of third down defense, and obviously scoring defense, because they haven't allowed a single point in the first 2 games. But, yeah, I think the perception, and it gets to go against Michigan here, but I would go the other way here. I think, and I do also wonder if Michigan showed everything in the first 2 weeks. I mean, considering they had, even though Army took them to the brink, I wonder if Michigan maybe didn't hold a few things back in those first 2 games.
My number's 1.5. I mean, everybody that listens to this show and has listened for a long time knows I'm an Ohio State fan. So it pains me greatly to say anything positive about that team up north. But I mean, this does feel like an overreactionary line to me. This feels like, Michigan struggled going through. And look, maybe Michigan looks absolutely awful on offense again in this game. Maybe they're just not efficient. But still, I mean, this isn't a triple option that you're preparing for where, look, I mean, I don't understand, and this is going to be an off-topic rant. I do like Michigan in the game, by the way. But if you're a Power 5 team, why in the hell would you ever schedule a service academy? What is the in having to learn the option in a short week and getting cut blocked all day long with your defensive line? Like, I, for the life of me, have no idea why any team worth anything would schedule a service academy in the non-conference. And I think that's part of it. Michigan and Oklahoma back-to-back years.
Yeah, and if you're going to schedule not just even a service academy, you can maybe expand it to some of these teams that do run triple option. And you saw that in week 1 with LSU scheduling Georgia Southern before the game at Texas. LSU, when you have it in the first game of the season and you've got all these summer practices and these 2-a-days in August, you're more apt to be able to be better prepared against that option. And LSU saw it against Georgia Southern in week 1, where maybe that result's going to be a little different if they play it in the middle of the season. But they absolutely destroyed Georgia Southern, who damn near beat Minnesota and probably, you could have argued, should have won at Minnesota last week. But when you have that time to prepare, it really matters. But when you're Michigan and you're playing at the second, third game and you've just got that standard week to prepare, it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, it definitely is. And again, I think that's part of the perception problem here in this game is that, a lot of people just don't take things like that into account of, hey, they just played this gimmicky offensive scheme that's hard to prepare for. And you lost some key guys from that defense last year too. And look, I mean, for better or worse, right or wrong, you're looking ahead to this Wisconsin game with a bye or not. I mean, this is a huge game for you. So I do think Michigan's the right side there. I mean, I don't know if I love it enough to take it for a nugget pick or something like that. But, again, I mean, it'll be a personal play to be sure. Another side in college football that you were kind of looking at here, this is an interesting one. The Ohio Bobcats kind of on your radar this week.
Yeah, and I've gone back and forth a little on this game. And look, it took a lot of money early on. I think this opened maybe like 6 or 6.5, I want to say. I'm just trying to go a little bit from memory here. But Louisiana Lafayette did get bet in this game, and it's down to about 3.5. And look, they got bet because, look, they're 4th in FBS in total offense and 3rd in rushing offense. And Napier, and I think this is a program that's an up-and-comer down in at Louisiana Lafayette because Billy Napier coached under Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban. So he's obviously had tutelage of guys that know how to win and guys that are absolute killers as coaches. But this is a little bit of a tricky spot, too, for UL Lafayette. I mean, they put up 748 and 593 in terms of yardage against FCS, Texas Southern, and Liberty the last 2 weeks, and also 430 on Mississippi State, which is a respectable against what's usually a pretty good defense. But you've got your 3 biggest conference games in a row over a 4-week span coming up. You go to Georgia Southern, you get Appalachian State at home, and then at Arkansas State. That's essentially going to determine where this team's going to be in the Sun Belt in terms of winning that conference. Ohio's got to come off a rival loss. They lost to Marshall 33-31, and you know this being from Ohio. Those campuses are only I think 70 miles apart, Ohio and Marshall. So that's a big rivalry, and Ohio came up short, but they got 2 straight road games that they had. Now they come home, and then they have a bye week before they open the MAC schedule. This is one I could see maybe coming back with a little bit of money on Ohio because people are going to look at those ULL stats and be really impressed. But I think this could be a buy low opportunity on Ohio, and I'm seeing some threes juice like minus 115. And this is a real tricky spot, I think, for Lafayette and kind of a nondescript, non-conference game where you've got all of your big games in the conference pretty much in a row. There's a bye week in between, but, you know, when you're ULL and you're in the Sun Belt and you're in a non-Power 5 conference, I mean, that's pretty much your goal is to win the conference title. And so I could maybe see a little bit of a shaky effort from that side, and maybe Ohio, knowing that they've lost 2 in a row on the road to Pitt and Marshall, maybe this is kind of a get-right game for them.
I like your thought process there. I think it's really interesting to also consider the fact that Athens, Ohio is not Lafayette, Louisiana. You know, I mean, you talk about travel spots and stuff like that, and they really come up a lot in college basketball, you know, where you may be in one of those real small, low major conferences. You fly into an airport that's 3 hours away from where you're actually going. You got to take a bus and all kinds of other stuff to get there. While Athens, Ohio isn't that hard to get to, it's still pretty far from both Columbus and Cincinnati. So I don't know where Lafayette's actually flying in, but you know, you still got some travel. It's kind of a weird spot to go. Ohio has a pretty good home field advantage there in the MAC because Athens is in the middle of nowhere, so there's nothing else to do. It's an interesting spot to say the least. And then again, as you said, you know, how much game planning goes into the equation? And there's always questions about these scheduling spots about, well, how do you quantify a look-ahead spot? How do you quantify a letdown spot? I get it. It shouldn't be, you know, pure justification for a play. But at the same time, for Lafayette, like you said, they have 3 huge conference games coming up. How much emphasis are they putting on this game? That's where you get the look-ahead factor is the team may not be prepared. So that's kind of what you're sort of hoping for in a spot like this.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, that's kind of the handicapping that I really like to do in terms of just finding those situational spots. I mean, we kind of, when we had a discussion off the air before we started the segment, talking about like modelers and stuff. And I think there's just so many different ways to do this. And what makes sports betting such a unique thing and a unique challenge is there are some guys that can win being modelers. I'm not one of those guys. I'm not good enough to do that. Where what my strength is, I think, is analyzing psychology of these teams, especially when you're dealing with mercurial personalities of 18 to 23-year-olds that are in college. I mean, that I think is kind of what I would say my strength or my bread and butter is as a handicapper, is to really evaluate those spots and those situations rather than kind of just going off raw numbers.
Before we transition over to the NFL side, Wes, any other spots, any other interesting things you're kind of looking at this weekend in college?
Yeah, there were a couple that I was looking at. And I know we talked about those Big Ten games earlier, and I'll just try to go rapid fire here. One I looked at was Miami of Ohio and Ohio State. Now, you got to really hold your nose for this one if you want to take Miami of Ohio at about 39.5, kind of the market high. Ohio State is, of course, off a Big Ten road win at Indiana, a very easy win, much to my chagrin as an Indiana alum. That was a putrid performance. But nevertheless, Ohio State's really good, and I think their defense is legitimately improved this year. I mean, it wasn't a talent issue. It may have been a coaching issue or just, guys not taking proper ankles or whatnot. But they get Miami of Ohio here, who, all these kids that play at Miami University, and I know you've been to Oxford, and I have as well. These are kids that probably mostly are from Ohio that dreamed of playing for the Buckeyes or dreamed of playing at Ohio Stadium. So they're at least going to do that on this other side. So you know that this team's at least going to get an effort. And this is kind of transitive handicapping a little bit. They both have a common opponent really early in the season. Miami of Ohio lost in a rivalry game to Cincinnati 35-13. Cincinnati covered, minus 17.5 was the close. Cincinnati, of course, the week before went to Ohio State and got shut out. They actually took the money And Ohio State got to as low as 14, and Ohio State shut them out 42-0, a pretty easy win. Does Ohio State, and you got to evaluate the psychology of Ryan Day, is he going to be like Urban Meyer here? Does he really want to lay out Miami of Ohio? Knowing that they've got a road game next week against Nebraska, who has gotten a lot of hype, and Ohio State is kind of in that show 'em who's boss type of spot where it's like, okay, this is the plucky upstart in the Big Ten, Nebraska. Well, we got to show them who King Daddy really is in this conference. So you get Miami of Ohio in here, and look, Urban in the past has laid some of these guys out and really couldn't help it. I mean, I remember when he played Bowling Green, who gave him his first job, and Ohio State won 77-10. So this is a little bit of a risk to take somebody like Miami of Ohio, but maybe Ohio State is not as interested as we think in terms of trying to win this game by 40 points. So I thought that was kind of an interesting spot as well going forward in the college football.
Yeah, and also Ohio State got Nebraska on deck on the road, so that's a tricky little game for them. And 28 guys on the Miami of Ohio roster from Ohio, certainly wishing they could probably go to Ohio State. Nothing against Miami of Ohio, does have a very, very good hockey program. But that's an excellent point. And also, too, I mean, look, you want Justin Fields healthy. You want J.K. Dobbins healthy. You probably want Master Teague healthy because he's played really well, too. I mean, you're going to see a lot of Chris Chugginoff in this game. You're going to see probably whoever the third-string running back is for Ohio State. You're going to see a lot of dudes get the chance to play. So I think the one thing I would say is that the worrisome part for me, backing Miami of Ohio, is last week, I know you watched the Ohio State-Indiana game, Justin Fields overthrew multiple guys down the field that were open. So I think in the first half, Ohio State's going to just completely open up the playbook, give Fields the chance to throw the ball downfield, try to get some touch on some of those deep balls. But I think in the second half, they put it completely away. So maybe full game Miami of Ohio, first half Ohio State, something like that. You know, maybe the way that I would look to go at this. It just makes sense to me. The same thing as FAU. Blow them out early, put it in cruise control.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, but basically, like taking this Miami of Ohio team, you're basically saying, okay, we need about 10 to 14 points out of these guys. If we can get 10 to 14 out of these guys, then we've pretty much got a good chance to cover, because it did remind me a little bit of the FAU game where FAU got kind of in that back door, and look, they were going to keep trying when they got down early, and kind of the middle of the fourth quarter, you started to see a lot more second and third unit guys for the Buckeyes.
All right, so we transition over to the NFL side of things here, and this league, man, it's kind of a tough watch, but it's a real tough bet right now. You've got all the PI reviews. You've got so many quarterback injuries. Now we can add Cam Newton to the list as well, so it seems like he may not play this week against Arizona. You've got just two lines or more than 3 touchdowns. It's a tough bet right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to see in week 3, to see 2-3 touchdown favorites, essentially. I mean, and I guess looking back before the season, look, the teams that we thought were going to be the, I guess, true elite teams, the teams that had the shortest Super Bowl future odds, New England, Kansas City, the Los Angeles Rams. I mean, those teams are really, really good. And then some teams that we thought were really, really bad are really, really bad. That would be Miami, I think, and potentially a couple other teams, the Giants. I mean, those were teams, the Redskins, that people thought weren't going to be very good. And then there's a couple mild surprises. I don't think most expected the Pittsburgh Steelers to be 0-2 at this point, but here they are. And then obviously now having to play the number 2 quarterback for the duration of the season. So there's always kind of some surprises here. And then you still want to take things with a grain of salt because it's a 2-0 start. And look, there's always a couple teams maybe that, okay, this team's for real. Well, we know that the Patriots, Rams, Chiefs, they're for real at 2-0. But then there's a couple teams out there like San Francisco, who I thought was going to be better this year, and I bet their win total, but I'm not sure if they're that good right now. Seattle is another one. I'm not sure if they're really that good. Buffalo is another one, 2-0. I'm not sure if they're really that good, but a lot of the 2-0 teams, basically, at least this year, I don't think it's much of an overreaction. Because I was asking this question on our Share the Green Zone on the VSIN last night to a bookmaker here in town. I go, which 2-0 team are you selling? Which 0-2 team are you buying? And usually there's an 0-2 team, even if they maybe don't make the playoffs, but that kind of comes around and turns it around and at least gets competitive and goes on a late run in the season. And he goes, these 0-2 teams just seem really historically bad. I mean, you know Miami's not going to turn around. You know the Jets probably aren't going to turn around. The Giants have already announced that Daniel Jones is going to take over the reins. So you got a rookie quarterback out there that's going to have to go through the growing pains. Denver doesn't look very good, especially on offense. And Cincinnati came back to earth last week, even though I do kind of like them this week in that spot against Buffalo. But, I mean, that's what you're seeing. I mean, there kind of is a haves and a have-nots category really in the NFL right now, at least early on.
Well, and the problem that I'm finding is, I mean, look, you know, Miami's so bad that Dallas may cover this number. The Jets, with all their injuries, they may just be so bad that New England covers this number. And the problem is that, you know, you've got your elites, you've got your obvious have-nots, and all the teams in the middle just to some degree feel interchangeable. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if you know, one team beats another in any given week. And that's the hard part about the NFL here is I feel like unless you're going to take these really bad teams and be contrarian and hope that they're able to cover, or you're going to take the really good teams, it's almost like you're flipping coins with these teams in the middle because they either have, you know, average to below average quarterback play, poor coaching, or, you know, some sort of already present injury problem. So
right.
I don't know what the answer is in the NFL right now. And it sucks to say that in week 2, and especially with, you know, some contest investment out there. I know both of us have that, but these teams in the middle, I don't know if I can really trust any of them week after week after week.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of these teams, and there's a couple matchups like Houston and the Chargers. They look like they're pretty interchangeable right now. I mean, they look like they're the same team, maybe team that could go 9-7 and compete for the bottom 2 wild card spots. I mean, Houston can still win that division. Anybody can win the AFC South. That's really the only division where all 4 teams, including the team that's 0-2, have legitimate shots to win the division. But, yeah, some of these matchups, Atlanta and Indianapolis, they look a little bit interchangeable right now. So you really, I mean, it's almost like what you have to do is try to go against the perception from the week before, because with only a 16-game schedule, the NFL is the ultimate overreaction sport. I mean, we see it in baseball. You know, there are times that really good teams, there are times the Yankees and the Dodgers are going to get swept. There are times when, historically speaking, I'll just use an example, the Warriors may go on a road trip and lose 3 or 4. That's going to happen when you have more games and more contests and I guess, longer seasons. But in the NFL, you're going to get that weak overreaction. But it has been a little hard when, I guess, the line of demarcation is so much in permanent marker, if you will, black permanent Sharpie marker between really, really good teams and really, really bad teams. So it is very hard. And I mean, for contest purposes, not even just betting for your own pocket, in contest purposes, it's hard to use the Jets in New England. It's hard to use Miami and Dallas this week. I mean, so those are almost games you immediately want to throw out. I mean, look, New England, 18.5, I mean, on the road, even against a bad team, that's a divisional game. There was rumors of a tropical storm, so that kept me off the game, and they end up covering it easy. So then it's like, well, I feel dumb because I'm going against kind of what I've always known, which is not to lay double digits, and especially on the road in the NFL. Doesn't necessarily mean I want the other side, but then you feel kind of dumb because they just cover these numbers so easy. But I still can't bring myself to do it because your margin for error is so small if you lay these type of gargantuan favorites. But then you got to really hold your nose to be on the other side.
It's almost like what we've talked about before, and I know you filled in a few times for the SuperContest segment last year where we discussed, I mean, you know, when there are, let's say there are, you know, 6 teams on a bye, all of a sudden you're down to 13 games you can pick from in the contest. You're not going to take Thursday because there's too much late injury information, so you're down to 12. Well, if teams like Miami or, the Jets with Luke Falk or God knows who's playing quarterback for them in the middle of the season, if you start scratching out those games, well, then maybe you're down to 11 or maybe you're down to 10.
Right.
It's hard to pick half of the NFL card. I mean, it just is with the tightness and the efficiency of the market. So, man, it's going to be tough this year, I think, for contest purposes. But one thing I do want to ask you about here, one game in particular, and then I'll let you go. You mentioned liking Cincinnati a little bit. I know you mentioned in the notes you sent over, maybe looking at Pittsburgh to rally with Mason Rudolph and maybe San Francisco playing over its head a little bit. Also, first home game back after back-to-back road games. I want to ask you about Oakland because I've had some discussions with some people here trying to figure out how we handicap the Oakland Raiders. Play well for a quarter against the Chiefs, wind up losing that game, not covering the number. They don't play at home until November 3rd. They play 4 true road games, a game in London, and have a bye. So if I'm looking at this in the NBA or the NHL, something like that, I'm looking to rally behind that team thinking, well, they're going to try and get this road trip off to a good start, because teams want to do that. You want to try to play 500 on the road. I don't know if that applies here in the NFL to Oakland. So how are you handling this situation against Minnesota this week?
Yeah, I wasn't positive what I was going to do with this game because, look, I really like Minnesota's defense. I really like their running game. They did a nice job rallying against Green Bay when they got down pretty early and actually shut out Green Bay in the second half. But with the Raiders, I mean, I think with that game last week, and I actually split on that game. I took the Raiders for the game, but then I also took them for the second half, and it ended up being 0-0, where I didn't think the Raiders played horrible. I just think they got blitzkrieged really quick by the Chiefs, and then all of a sudden it's 28-10, and what that forces you to do, because that team can score so fast and so often, you make mistakes. And Derek Carr made a couple interceptions where he's trying to force it, trying to make a play, and ends up making mistakes. So you've seen that line. I think I'm seeing about 8. I'm even seeing some 8.5 out there. That might be a game I stay away from this week because I don't know what we're going to get out of the Raiders off that loss. And then now knowing that you're away from home, they have a bye week in between there, but most of the guys on the bye week go home or go back to their alma maters or whatnot. So, Oakland's not going to be playing in that stadium until the first week of November because they got a London game mixed in there with against Chicago. So, I'm not sure. This might be something where I just have to sit and watch and see how this team adjusts. I mean, when you have a long road trip, you would think just conventional wisdom that your best effort is at least going to be your first game because it's like, okay, we know what we're in for. We know the schedule. We know we're on the road. So we've got to have our most focus and our best effort at least in the first spot. So that would make me kind of lean to the Oakland side. But this is a young team with a lot of new people on that roster that were not on that roster last year. So that is one I'm probably going to look to pass on.
Wes Reynolds, who's working, you find on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1, also contributor to that Point Spread Weekly publication over at VSIN. And Wes, when can people hear you on the air?
Yeah, Monday nights, 6 to 10 Pacific time with Brady Cannon on the Green Zone. I also work a Thursday and Friday shift. I'm usually on from 8 to 10. Amal Shah is on from the 6 to 8 with Brady Cannon hosting. And then also the Green Zone, we do it on the weekends while the action is going on. Saturday for the college football slate, 2 to 6 Pacific time, and Sunday for the NFL, 3 to 7 Pacific time.
Well, like I said, make sure you follow Wes on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Wes, appreciate your time and your flexibility here doing this a day in advance for me. Really appreciate that. We'll talk to you again next week.
You got it, boss. Thanks for having me.